The Passover meal is rich in imagery and history and has been celebrated by Jews for over 4,000 years. As Jesus approached his final hours, he chose this meal to reveal some things about himself. I wanted to understand the thoughts and moods around the table and how Jesus was feeling during his Last Supper.
I wonder what I would want to eat for my last meal. A lot of unhealthy, meaningless foods come to mind. It will be the last time I taste food on this earth and this body, so I want it to be memorable, and I could care less about calories. Jesus wanted his last meal to have meaning and be memorable. So he gathered his apostles together for the Passover, and the result became our communion. It was a moment filled with emotions, and it became known as the Last Supper.
In the morning, he sent Peter and John to prepare the Passover. They would have gone to the market. They would have selected a lamb. It would have been inspected by the priest. So it was a perfect lamb, not a broken ear or a broken leg. They would have gone into the temple courts, through the court of the women, into the court of the Israelites, where that animal would have been killed by the priest. The blood was caught in silver and golden vessels and brought up the ram to the altar and splashed against the bottom of the altar. And then the animal would have been flayed, the skin taken off and the inside taken off. And then Peter and John would have taken that to where Christ was going to keep the Passover.
I can't imagine enjoying a meal when the prevalent feeling around the table is death, especially for my own. Every bite I would take would be one bite closer to death. Every sip would be one sip closer to death. So how did Jesus face his last meal?
John 13 says that before the meal, Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Now this was one of the most humbling tasks anyone could do.
He told them that he had set the example and now they should wash one another's feet. By finding the most humiliating task around, Jesus showed the limitless boundaries of his love for others.
Not everyone at the table shared that love. Judas Iscariot was making plans to betray Jesus, and Jesus knew it. The Bible says the idea of a betrayer sitting so close to Jesus troubled him in spirit. He outed Judas and told him to do what he was planning to do.
In the traditional Passover setting, the host would be sitting right here, and the youngest would be sitting over there, John, and over here to the left would be sitting Judas, the guest of honor. So why did Jesus remove Judas? Jesus wasn't afraid of Judas. He just wanted to speed up the process. Now, I would tell my betrayer to have seconds and thirds, and how about some coffee with your dessert? But Jesus wanted to get down to business. He wanted to save the world, but Judas was leaning back and picking his teeth. The crucifixion needed to coincide with Passover, and time was ticking away. Jesus was ready to die.
He knew Judas was going to betray him. He predicted it. He told Judas to go through with it. But he also said, woe to him who does this. So he knew both the ultimate destiny and the immediate choices that were going to be necessary to bring it about. Joseph said to his brothers in Egypt, who had sold him for dead, really, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So there's a divine aspect to it and a human aspect of it. And Jesus knew from the divine aspect that this was absolutely necessary. From the human aspect, it grieved him that Judas was going to do it, but nonetheless, he had decided to do it.
There was a feeling of anticipation in the air, and part of that paralleled the celebration of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which marked a night of anticipation for the Jewish people before the Passover. God would pull them out of Egypt so quickly, there was no time to wait for the bread to rise. Jesus also could not wait that evening. He too was in a hurry.
Jesus said at the table, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Well, who eagerly can't wait to suffer? Only someone so willing to lay down his life for others. Well, washing feet and the humiliation tied to that was nothing like the crucifixion that was about to happen.
I think the atmosphere, and I think his attitude at that time is one of ultimate love, ultimate sobriety. And I think that he is more deeply in love with these disciples for what's about to happen because he knows how much they need him, and he knows what he's about to do for them.
What sort of emotions are sort of surrounding Passover?
For a Jewish person, Passover stands for, I guess, above all, being sure that there is a salvation, and even being in a very bad situation in Egypt, for instance. And when Jews celebrate Passover, they are going through a lot of events along the history that God saved us from other troubles. So the idea of salvation by God is there. That's a very strong part of it.
God's miraculous intervention allowed the Jews to be freed from oppression. In the next 24 hours, God's miraculous intervention would help the Jews and all people to be free from the oppression of sin.
Leaving Egypt was born of being Jews, getting the Ten Commandments in the desert. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of the faith, not for one people, Abraham and the few descendants of him, but for a nation. And the Last Supper stands for the same thing, the new beginning.
This moment was so huge, Jesus did not want anyone to miss it. So he established a new ritual to occur routinely in Christianity. Passover now took on a new meaning.
I can just imagine Christ sitting now at the table with all his disciples and that dead lamb on the table, knowing that the next day he's going to be dead as that lamb is. If I was Christ, I couldn't eat that lamb, but he did for our sake. He knew that he was the Passover lamb. He was going to fulfill it, and he saw it graphically portrayed in front of him in the shape of that lamb that was put on the table.
Jesus refused to allow the gravity of this moment ruin his final meal. He gave thanks for his broken body and shed blood. He looked forward to eternity and that moment in heaven when we would all celebrate what Jesus did. He sang a hymn, praising God despite all the difficulties that laid ahead. I guess from this Last Supper, I learned how to face difficult times. I admire Jesus' courage to face his death, and I marvel that Jesus took time to serve others. He wanted to make this moment memorable. Jesus wanted people to learn from it. All throughout, Jesus gave thanks. He was positive. He sang songs. Only a man so consumed with God's will for his life, a sacrificial spirit, could react to what was about to happen. The greatest tragedy of all. Well, what would you want to do if you had your final moment and you just had, say, all of your loved ones around, and it was your final moment? What would you want to say or do during those times?
I think to express my love and how thankful I am to their love to me, and also to hope that there will be a continuity of my ideologies that I try to deliver to them all along, and something would be continued, not personally, but in the level of what should be done or how the world should be in my eyes.
That'd be a hard moment, wouldn't it?
A very hard moment, for sure.